Fantastic. So it says 25 minutes, so that's what we will do. And we will talk about not only the value of being consumer-centric, but also how we will go about it, as the second part of the morning will be about how to go about it. And what we will share with you is a piece of work we've done over the last half year about how to drive customer-centric growth. And it's a piece of work which ultimately will bring to the HBR in September, so you get some kind of a sneak preview on what we will publish over there. And
around getting feedback.
Let me first talk about the why consumer-centric growth is so critical.
Adjusting the strategy.
First of all, because it's possible. And I think quite a lot of people during this morning already talked about, the amount of connectivity we have with our customers is so detailed and so deep. If people have 7 devices or maybe even 20 machines at home or in the office where we are connected and we understand their behavior, we can do so much more personalized content, I think, as we just talked a minute ago. So it is possible. But more importantly, it gets dangerous. More important is that it's also essential. If you really think how businesses, either to professionals or to business or whatever, have created value over the last decade. It started with driving scale. If you have more manufacturing scale, you get more efficiency, but also more quality to your customer. Yeah? Then the depth of your distribution, either by being global or just buying very deep to your customer, was creating value. Obviously, today, the value gets created because we understand our customer much better and we're much better tailored to what they do. Yeah? So it's really critical here to survive, and it's a real source of competitive advantage. If you will not do, you will stay behind. So it's possible, but essential at the same time. Yeah? Now, and obviously there's a lot of talking about it, as we partly talked this morning. But what is really interesting, as we are in business, does it really drive growth, or is it just what we like marketeers, we love to dive into the brain of our customer and what excites him. But does it bring business? And that was one of the tasks we set out when we joined up. So we talk about the what, what drives customer centricity and how would you go about it? Because if it's there, you want to grasp it. Now, we brought quite a broad platform around the industries together, from Keith Weed to our own Sir Martin, to a broad range of industries, to really help us to structure the study on how to figure this value and the approach together. And we partnered with quite a lot of organizations. For an impatient person, this is not easy. Around the organization, with the ASMR in Europe, the ARF in the US, for the ones who love the Vermeer logo, now here's your chance. But also with a lot of publicizing companies around the world, because when we found it, it's all about dissemination. And in total, we captured more than 60 markets in terms of geographies. We did more than 300 interviews with CEOs, CMOs, CMI leaders around the world to really understand what's their take in driving customer-centric growth. And most importantly also is, we did an online survey with over 10,000 participants, so we can really quantify and validate what over and underperformers are doing. And we topped it up with, definitely leveraging the LinkedIn database, which was very both rich and deep. And first, and I think also when we start to frame it, because again, if you would Google customer-centric, you get probably a 2 billion hit approximately. So we first again need to, what is it? And when we were really listening to the stories about those companies in transformation, which was about, indeed understanding your customer need. That's where it starts, which feels obvious. But what we definitely saw, it's not only that outside in, it's also the outside to your customer. Is what do we want to bring to the needs of our customers? What's the purpose we want to bring to the market? And then the third dimension is how do we commercialize it, which gives you a sustained impact because it makes it enduring and refuelable. So if anything, customer centricity is a strategy, so not an activity. It's a strategy where you bring your customer, your purpose, and your commercialization together. Now that's a bit of the framing. Now the interesting bit starts, is what did we learn how to go about it? So can you catch? It works. She flew in from San Francisco, so this was indeed essential.
Is my mic working okay? Everybody can hear? Great. So as we kicked off the Insights 2020 work with Millward Brown and our partners, we wanted to look at overperformers versus underperformers. So overperformers defined as those companies that are growing at a faster rate than their competitors. And obviously the underperformers, you would know who you are, you're lagging behind. And we asked, as we set out on the research, we asked them one first question. How do you see the future? In the age of the connected customer, what are the real opportunities? And there were 4 themes that really stood out for us. The first,
You have to be patient.
if the clicker works. The first is that, I don't think it's working. I can keep going, but there we go, there we go. So we heard 4 key opportunities that really stood out for us. And the first is that you can now use data to turn that into action across all of the customer touch points. We heard some of this on the previous panel, so some of these opportunities should be familiar for all of you in the audience. We can also use access to these insights to look at behavioral analytics and understand what people are doing with our products and services. That behavioral data can feed into making a more personalized or customized experience. We heard some of that, again, on the previous panel for B2B marketers, but I would argue also for B2C. And then lastly, what is the brand purpose? How can we really connect with the customer, driving the true customer need and clarifying what our brand purpose was? And we heard the brand purpose and being true to understanding what that is and communicating that in your marketing was really a key opportunity from the overperformers. On the flip side, there were also some challenges. And the first challenge really being, we're now operating in this world of silos with bureaucracy. And that can prevent us from being as collaborative and innovative as we want to. We're also still trying to fit the new world into old world models. There's so much more data now at our fingertips. We're trying to figure out how do we fit this into the old functions and the old structures. And that's making our worlds a lot more difficult. Of course, making sense of all this data that we now have at our fingertips is also a challenge. How do we figure out how to make this actionable and really find the key insight that's going to help us understand the customer in a better way? And then we also need a different type of person. In addition to the more technical and analytical skills, we also need to look for whole brain thinkers, those people who can understand the business problem, understand the business need, and turn that into action. And interestingly, from this research, we found that underperformers were really struggling with the silos and the functions and trying to fit everything and make it work, whereas overperformers had almost accepted that that's just the way things go now. And they were much more focused on really understanding the holistic data, understanding how to recruit the right types of talent to help us in this new world of technology and data and customers. So what were the drivers of customer centricity? We started out with more than 60 different variables in this research, and as Robert mentioned before, a lot of qual and quantitative interviews went into feeding into this process. And we narrowed it down to 10 key drivers. And these 10 key drivers are really framed across 3 different dimensions. So the first dimension being the total experience. What is the customer experience in the store, on the phone, as it's using your products and services? How do we also then move to a more internal dimension of creating this internal culture and mindset of being obsessed with the customer, and how do we solve their needs in a stronger and better way? And then lastly, we have access to all of this data and insights. How do we actually use that as an engine to fuel the customer experience? How do we actually use that as a strategic lever to gather more insights and analytics about the customer journey? And so I'll start with the total experience. And for each of these, I'm going to talk about the driver, and then I'm going to share a case example to really bring that to life. And we'll talk a little bit about what overperformers did versus underperformers, and I'll also share the journey of customer-centric growth. So you all in the audience can start to see for your own organizations, where do we sit and how can we actually think about becoming more customer-centric? So the total experience, the first driver, and Penry mentioned this in his talk earlier, is being purpose-led. Having a clear brand purpose. You can see the overperformers in the orange. We found that 80% of overperforming companies were actually linking everything that they do to a clear brand purpose versus the underperformers. They were also linking this purpose to a customer need and solving the customer need in a better way. And I think Dulux is a fantastic example of this. Dulux started with this idea, and actually it came out of some customer research, that actually color can have a real profound impact on how you're thinking and how you're feeling. And so for Dulux, it wasn't just about selling tins of paint. They were actually selling an emotion, a feeling, and in some cases that was optimism. And so they started this Let's Color as part of their brand communications, and they moved through this journey where it actually became sort of their true north for all of their decisions, to ultimately it became a movement. And they created something that some of you may have seen called the Let's Color movement, where they actually went into underprivileged neighborhoods in Pakistan and in Rio and created these beautiful buildings using color to actually motivate and inspire people. They also went into schools and hospitals, realizing that the real power and the thing that they were selling was an optimism and an ability to influence people's lives in a better way. So I think that's a really great example of having a clear brand purpose that actually goes far beyond just selling paint. The second driver to customer-centric growth is data-driven customization. The example I'll share here is one from Allstate, which is a US automotive insurance brand. We saw that actually overperformers were doing a better job of creating experiences based on data versus underperformers. And in the case of Allstate, they actually went from a very, what I would call a one-to-many approach with their marketing to an incredible one-to-one approach. They used a sensor, technology-enabled sensor, that they put in the cars of their drivers, which actually allowed them to monitor driving behavior. And they used this driving behavior to actually create a real-time predictive model to help adjust their premiums accordingly. That might be a little bit too big brother for some of you in the audience, but another quick example that I noticed recently was for Zipcar. Zipcar being the car that you can rent and hire in cities around the world. Zipcar is using some of this technology to look for safer driving routes for some of the folks that are renting them. So there's a real opportunity here to not only create a customized experience, but in some cases actually create a safer experience. And the last driver of really creating this total experience is touchpoint consistency and using the data to create a powerful consistency in your brand image and with the purpose that you're bringing to your brand. The example here I'll use is IBM, where they actually looked at the Smarter Planet. I'm sure many of you have heard of this campaign in the audience. They realized that customers weren't buying products, they were actually buying solutions. And they built their entire campaign around a Smarter Planet, which is actually very purposeful if you think about it, using technology to solve some of the world's problems. But not only do you talk to someone in a store about IBM's products, but they also use the same language in their marketing and their social media, in some of their ad campaigns, and also if you go into the store. So the customer has created this very consistent touch point with the brand and understanding what that purpose is. And we'll move on to come on to the culture obsessed and how do you actually create a culture internally that's obsessed with the customer need.
Very good. So where the total experience is the most outward-facing part of your consumer centricity that touches your customer every day, in and out, in a purposeful and in a consistent and in a personalized way. But how do you go about it that this reaches your customer? And it starts with what we would call the customer obsession. And we'll talk you through the 4 key drivers within there. And the first is really embraced by all. You know, it only works to create this total experience if it's not just done something by the sales team or the marketing team. What you see by the overperformers, 79% of the overperformers really rallied throughout the organization to put the customer first. You know, which is a fantastic gap versus the 13, where the underperformers said this is really something for the total company. Yeah. And the example I think is a very nice one is FedEx in this case. And I don't know how many know, the purple promise. But what's very clever about it, not only articulating, that I will make every FedEx experience outstanding, which they claim to their customer, but because they do it so publicly, it really works equally hard, if even not harder, for everybody in the organization. So either if you're at the service desk, or you're doing the invoicing, or you're designing the new feature or the new experience, you know that this is what we promise to our consumer. So it's a very clever way to really rally the total organization behind this customer centricity. Yeah? And that's the only way you make it in this total experience company work. The second one, and this for me probably was the most obvious one from the 10 drivers. That customer centricity can only work if your leadership is full behind it. And again, with the 91%, it's unavoidable. So either they're on board or you find some new leaders to make this happen. And therefore it's so critical. Now the example is Credit Karma, which is a US credit card financial management system, which is a very small startup, but is a good example of quite founder-led. And a lot of founder-led companies is always the biggest role model where the CEO is really driving home, the customer-centric. So like those guys really felt that the way, credit cards are marketed in the US is really wrong. It's really driving usage, moving up in that, but not ultimately doing right for the broader population. And they said that should change. And therefore, with all the data available, there's a ton of data available, you can individually really be a financial coach, give them advice on what's your run rate, what's right, and how it interfaces with all your other financial liabilities. And those guys were so obsessed that this is what really needs to be done. But they were so obsessed that, we should not do it in a patronizing way. The experience should be very empowering. And every piece, when they work, and it's a 250 people company, so it's relatively easy, but they really drive it home that this is really putting not the credit card first, but your customer first. And that drives it home. Yeah? So leadership is paramount. Now, then the third driver in this domain, I thought let's take something bigger, $280 billion business, and it's mentioned quite a few times today, is Shell. And it's a good example of this driver of collaboration. And I think it's mentioned quite a few times by different people in the morning. It's never a one-man show or a one department show. It's when you bring all the silos together. And here you see overperformance, 72% really have a deep collaborative approach. And for Shell, I think it's deep in their DNA because of the complexity of the business. It's not just what we think we need to do or what's technically available, what all the stakeholders in the world have to say. But ultimately, and for that's almost reaching for them at last, is really what the customers, and they now even co-create with the customers to find solutions which is more energy sustainable in the world. And again, that really frames it differently and elevates step by step to become much more customer-centric and involve all people around the organization. And then driver 7, I thought, let's say something embarrassing about LinkedIn on experimentation. I think it resembles most when the panel talked about bravery, because we have to do a lot of things we don't know. There are a lot of things available to us. So if we only do it just, logically what we know and what's safe, we will not really be on the forefront on real consumer centricity. And that's what you see overperformers and underperformers. And you see even for overperformance, there's still a lot of upside to take this on. So this is probably one of the most toughest ones. And when I was working with LinkedIn, what I really enjoyed is that, first of all, they say, as an owner, I would do. There was the mindset, thinking as an owner. But when they did take step back, they talk about taking intelligence risks. So it's not, I need to talk to my boss, or let's talk to another stakeholder. Now, looking into this, I think this is what we do. It makes sense. If it goes wrong, it's still doable. So taking intelligence risks, so use the brain, but really have some bravery in a very clever way. And I think that really leads from the intelligence risk to the full empowerment. I act as an owner, and therefore the speed you can do and the novel ways you can figure out. And I think Price told a lot of things we still don't know. But still I know what feels right. I want to learn, and I think therefore experimentation is really critical in our journey. I need to do experimentation. Yeah, press harder.
I'll bring us home with the insights and analytics engine. So the last 3 drivers and examples we'll share. The first is that we really saw that overperforming companies showed that their insights and analytics were leading the business. They weren't just acting as a support function, or they didn't just go in to prove something that the business already knew. In the case of Unilever, the CMI team, their insights team there, is a strategic part of the business, and there are very few decisions that get made in Unilever that don't have some element of I&A in that process and really understanding the business strategy. We also saw that overperformers were more likely to have insights and analytics teams reporting directly into the CEO. You'll notice it's actually probably a relatively small number, but I think this is a trend if you think about a lot of I&A teams reporting into the marketing department, which can be a great thing. It leads our marketing forward. But if you think about the way and the direction that data and insights is going and the ability to have insights and analytics really embedded in the business strategy, it makes a lot of sense to have that incorporated and reporting directly into the CEO. And Tata, Harish Bhatt, who you see here, who previously ran the insights and analytics team at Tata, reported directly into the CEO. And you can see all the way through that customer-centric journey of really leading the business. The next driver is about unlocking the power of data, and I personally love this, and I love that we use a LinkedIn example for this as well. We saw that overperformers are linking more and different data sets to really share that insight, that powerful insight that they're looking for. And the economic graph, this is something that's very special to LinkedIn as part of our vision to really map and create a digital map of the world's economy. If you think about the data that we have on LinkedIn, jobs, skills, education, you've already heard some of that from Jennifer this morning around looking at the skills gap for marketers. The example here was actually something that we worked with the City of Manchester here in the UK on, where they realized that they needed to grow the economy, and that part of the way in which they were going to do that was by really showing the skills that they could improve for folks in the workforce. And so they came to us and they asked us to look at the existing skills that the workers had, skills that were being required for the jobs to get hired for tomorrow, and those sort of fast-growing, in-demand jobs. And we were able to identify the skills gap so that they could go in and actually do some training and help the workforce generate new skills for the future of tomorrow. So I think that's a very powerful way to start to think about looking more into the future. And the last driver is the critical capabilities. We learned that overperformers were much more interested in hiring people who have whole brain thinking, who are creative problem solving, they're storytelling, and they're really using their sort of business skills and understanding the business to get the right answer. And Mondelez is the example here, who's actually already undergone some training for their own insights and analytics team. I think it's a very powerful way of thinking about what does the future skills look like for marketers and for insights folks. So those are the 10 drivers. We started with the total experience, being very purposeful about your brand and moving into creating this internal culture that's risk-taking and collaborative, and then finally really using the insights engine to dial up that customer experience and understanding growth. So I'll turn it over to Robert to bring us home.
Okay. So 2 parting thoughts about what to do when Brand Week is over. So first of all, go in your goodie bag where you see the key statistics from this study right at your fingertips. But one, it's very interesting because it's such a quantitative survey. You can really measure driver by driver, how are you doing today? And if you move the needle, what's the impact to the overall growth? So you can really make a strategic choice. What is in your context the biggest game changer? Because doing 10 is never clever, yeah? But what are the 3 which really moves the needle? And this really helps you quite a practical way to assess where you are and where you want to go. So that's 1. 2, obviously, it's all about moving from product or service to total experience. that is what we need to do next week. It's all about moving from the detail of the data to really actioning the data. Because, otherwise nothing will happen. And finally, is about managing risks, which is my favorite, towards really experiment. And that delivers to customers, and you should not just deliver, you should innovate with them. So I hope that nourished your mind, and I see we're 6 seconds over, so apologies for that, but over to you, Henry.